Look at that. All right, so now we're live. So I'm just gonna hang out and be live for a second. Y'all just say live things.
Live from New York.
Nobody's from New York.
From
Oh no, you're from New York, aren't
We
you?
are actually.
from Delaware.
Well, I'm not from New York. I'm from
Yeah.
Garland, Texas, but
Ah,
You're not from
I
New
live
York.
there.
Then you're not from New York. Sorry.
yeah,
It's true. Although I have been here
yeah.
17, 10, 11
Doesn't
years
count.
Does it count if your plane landed in New York when you moved here?
now. What?
Does it count if your plane landed in New York and you stayed
does.
there?
It does.
Okay.
I'm a Brooklyn girl, so it's really funny because the other day someone was like, "Oh, you're from New York," and I was like, "I'm from Brooklyn." They're
Brooklyn.
like, "New York."
Bed-Stuy.
Like, those are not the same. Brooklyn. Thank you.
I was in Bed-Stuy, so
Exactly. See? Not the same. It's not the same.
are we still alive?
Okay. 55-inch screens. That's crazy.
Terrifying.
Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure that this
I can
went out.
keep look at our Twitter feed,
All right.
which has been blowing up tonight.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to make sure we're functional. There we go. Okay. Yep. Good. We're on a 7-second tape delay to counter any swearing people do. Okay. There we go. Okay. We're good.
All right.
All right. So let me start this recording over here. Oh, I did. Look at that. All right. You ready?
So we're live streaming now.
Right.
If people ask questions live stream, will that come in to this?
I believe it will.
Okay.
Yeah. In the
That
if
Q&A
it,
button.
they're in the YouTube live. If you go to the actual YouTube live page, there's a Q&A. This is what we need is like a test user.
I'll try to go on my Twitter here.
Okay.
I clicked the Q&A button and it just sat and span for me. Sat and spun.
Oh, okay.
Is that the Google Q&A or the YouTube Q&A?
Oh, we got 7 people watching us.
Woohoo! They're seeing this. Emergency managers testing out stuff.
Yeah, right. That's right. So we're gonna get questions. We just learned something important. So
Yes.
there's hi Jamie Cave. All right. So the Google chat is internal. So this is what we're learning about our technology. The
Okay.
Google chat is internal, and the actual chat on the screen, I've got here now. So there are 2 chats.
Okay.
So the public chat is if people want to do it, it's on the watch page.
Oh.
Okay.
It's interesting. I don't see the Q&A on here.
Yeah. It's only for people who have it on their 55-inch screens. All right.
Ooh.
So the Google chat is internal. So this is what we're learning about our technology. The Google chat is internal, and so I'm hearing that through somebody's screen. So you might want to mute it so it doesn't get on your mic. I've got it here now. So there are 2 chats.
There's your
Nicolette. Want to do it? It's on the watch page. Hey, Nicolette, I think we're hearing the screen through you.
I think you are. I muted it, but
Let's see. There's a volume in the bottom left.
got it. It was on Twitter and on the tab.
All right, great. Beautiful. Okay.
All right.
I think we're ready.
we're ready.
We ready?
Is everybody ready?
All right. So we'll intro, we'll music, and then we'll hand it off.
Again, you won't be able to hear the theme music, but
Don't let it freak you
maybe
out.
we'll put a hand up like this to let you know music is playing. I think that's what we did last time.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. You ready?
Yep.
Should we do vocal warm-up exercises?
Sibilance. Sibilance. The jalapeno ate my sedan. The jalapeno ate my sedan.
Now you're just not taking it seriously.
All right.
Ready?
Yes. All right.
Whew.
So
We are so occasional at this point. They ought to name it like a national holiday after us or something like that.
there's a really good band in Brooklyn named the Occasionalists.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard of those guys.
So
We should have them on the show.
we should.
We should get a live soundtrack. That's
Do
what
you
we
think they
need.
would write us custom theme music?
I bet they would. It could be
That'd be
about
pretty
every
sweet.
major. It could be about Krakatoa.
Yeah,
'Cause I think you can write a lot of good songs about Krakatoa.
yeah, definitely.
Oh.
So it's been a while. It's good to see you.
Yeah, man. I think we've both been in actual deployment world, right? We've been like activated.
Constantly, it feels like for the last like 5 months.
Right. I
Mine
feel
all domestic, yours internationally.
no, it's not. Hold on, it's not international, right? The Virgin Islands is U.S. territory.
I just feel like if you leave New York City, it's international.
Well, that's true. If you're a snobby New Yorker, it is international every time you leave New York City. That's right. You know what I think is? I think emergency managers ought to get points for every deployment. We should make it like a Pokemon.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
you got to catch them all.
that's a great idea. You could add it to your CV, how many points you have.
Yeah. And then the occasionalists could write you a theme song if you get to 100 deployments. You're giving it talk to the hand.
I know. I guess that shows up on the YouTube feed,
Mhm.
right? Right. All right. Well, we got a great show tonight, and it's actually even better than normal because you and I are going to pretty much shut up. the entire
That's right.
show and
Which
not
I think
talk.
that's really the best case for our show is if Mitch and Andrew actually shut up on the show.
Right.
Uh,
Because we're talking about women in emergency management, and
We thought it would be better to get some actual women in emergency management to host instead of us.
mansplaining what it's like to be a woman in emergency management. I
Right.
mean, I would like to say I've been in meetings with women in emergency management about
So you basically know.
I'm kind
Yeah,
of
you
an
basically
expert in
know.
it.
Yeah. But I think it's much better, and thank God that we brought in Dr. Samantha Montano and Nicolette Lewis Saint to take over from us tonight as co-hosts. So welcome, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Great to be back with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys have been all over the place these past few months anyway. Nicolette, thanks for coming back. You're like a friend of the show now, which means we get to ask you for favors. So just know those are coming.
Do you play any musical instruments by any chance?
That's right.
Write us a theme song.
If I write you a theme song, you're never going to want to play it.
I don't know about that. Have you heard our theme music? It's,
Oh, hey, don't insult the theme music. I mean, it's a little honky tonk, but what are you going to do?
That's true. That's true.
So what do you got for us tonight?
So we are going to be discussing women in emergency management. I think we're going to start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Samantha Montano. I study emergency management. I'm currently writing a book on climate change and emergency management. Nicolette?
Yeah, my name is Nicolette Lewis Saint. I am currently the executive director of Healthcare Ready. Before this, actually, a global health clinical pharmacologist and overall obsessed with disasters and disease outbreaks.
So I think maybe next we'll have Sarah and Susuma introduce themselves too. Sarah, you want to go first?
Sure, I was going to say maybe we had to thumb wrestle for it or something. So I'm Sarah Miller. I'm an emergency manager in Washington State. I currently serve the 16 cities of South King County. I'm also an adjunct professor at a couple of different schools, 5 different schools if we're telling the truth, but in graduate and undergraduate programs. And I'm an expert in this topic because I am, in fact, a woman.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I hate going after Sarah. Thanks a lot, you guys. I'm Susan Masili. I am a doctoral student right now, but I specialize in disaster human service coordination, and I'd like to think of myself as a Malcolm Gladwell style connector in emergency management. So there are folks who focus on the disaster, and I think that sometimes we have to focus on the people who do the disaster work, because those are the folks that get stuff done.
It's crazy talk. It's crazy.
And yes, I am a woman, in case, nobody noticed that part too.
Awesome. So I actually think we're going to jump in with a question that my mentor loves to ask me. I'm apologizing in advance, but I think it's important for women in this field to really stop and kind of take stock of how it feels to operate here. So I'm excited that we get to have this conversation. Really excited that Mitch and Andrew are going to be able to answer questions on their own podcast when we let them. But when was the first time that you realized that you were different? And Sarah's already laughing. So tell us the story. When was the first time?
Huh.
So the simple answer for me, when I was 14, I joined a volunteer search and rescue unit, and it was glaringly apparent. I wasn't the only girl there, but there were no women leaders, and we won't say exactly how long ago it was, but it was a long time ago, and it was a very different attitude. You had to be one of the guys in order to be accepted and in order to be able to do your job. And it was an instant realization.
Shall I jump in then?
Yeah, please.
So I want to say that I had a few different realizations.
Mm-hmm.
I came to this country when I was 4.5 years old, so I was socialized differently than most young women. I came from I'm Indian by birth and by socialization. So when I grew up, I didn't see the same things that everyone else did. But the first place that I noticed that I was different in the American world, if you will, is when I was in the Army. I was a medic. I wore the same uniform as everyone else, but I realized that as a medic around all the guys, I had to be, as Sarah said, I had to be like one of the guys. I had to cuss like one of the guys. And to be clear, I didn't want to smell like one of them. I just want to make that distinction right off the bat.
We do have our own patented perfume, Man Musk. I just want to jump in with that.
I'm not sure you're going to get any buyers for that. Okay. But there's another piece that I recognize for myself as an emergency manager. I started recognizing that I wasn't just a woman in emergency management. I was a brown woman in emergency management. And that really, really came into play when I was in the middle of the country. And all of a sudden, when I went into places, I didn't get service, or I was ignored, or if I was in a class with my colleagues, I would very often get ignored or passed over or spoken over. And it took me a while to piece it together. But I said I had to do something about that.
Sam, should we jump in on this one as well?
Yeah, probably. You want to go ahead?
Sure. So, Black girl from the Caribbean, from Brooklyn. So I've always been different. There actually isn't a box that I feel like I comfortably fit into. So a lot of what you guys said definitely resonates with me. I think so. I actually started in a different path. So I'm a chemical engineer by training. So I started out wanting to do fluid dynamics and all that stuff, and in a very, very white field, very male-dominated field. And actually a multi-generational field. So in engineering school, you find that my dad and my grandfather and the lineage is, it's a family business. And so that was the first time I looked around and realized, when it's time to do problem sets, the groupings did not have me in them. And it was hard to figure out how to justify my place here in that department. And frankly, it's not been that different in emergency management. I find that I am actually Blacker, more female, and younger than a lot of my peers. And so while I often deal with bias, I'm never actually sure which one it is, right? And so in some ways, very clear that there's some discomfort when that happens, but I can't necessarily say it's my Blackness or my womanness or the fact that I may just be a lot younger than some of my peers and colleagues. So that's my story. Samantha, what you got?
I started out in the nonprofit sector doing disaster work. And so there are a lot more women in that sector. And so I really kind of came into emergency management being surrounded by probably more women than most people are who enter emergency management. But the first time that it was the first time that I realized the extent to which being a woman in emergency management was so different. I was attending a planning meeting for a regional exercise that was being done. And I was just there to make observations. I wasn't participating. And I'm sitting in this room waiting for everybody else to get there. And all of a sudden I see that every single person walking through the door was a man. And when all was said and done, I was the only woman in a room of 40 people. And it's one thing to be the only woman in a room of 5 people, but to be the only woman in a room of 40 people for this, big event that involved agencies from multiple states, it was completely eye-opening to how different I felt just sitting there and how vulnerable I felt sitting there and how out of place I felt sitting there. So that was my big realization of, this is weird that I'm in emergency management. This is going to be a different experience. Mm. So it sounds like we all kind of have similar stories there. The next question we wanted to talk about was, how did you come to be a part of this conversation? How did you get involved talking about being a woman in emergency management, other than by virtue of actually being a woman in emergency management, of course? Do you want to start with Susuma this time?
Sure. So, sorry, Mitch and Andrew asked a few of us to join a conversation after the last IAM conference. And one of the topics we wanted to discuss was the diversity issue, the gender issue, the race and color issue. And we were really there to talk about the conference, and we just didn't have time. So, Sarah and I said, hey, we should really do another show. So he came back to us and said, hey, we have co-hosts. We're going to do that. And I said, I want to be a part of that. And so does Sarah. So in short, the very long answer is I kind of just elbowed my way on and said, I want to be a part of this conversation because I'm sick and tired of being overlooked or being looked through or whatever, just insert a word. I'm just tired of that. And instead of complaining, I want to do something about it. So here we are.
And so I got started really in this realm by joining a couple of women's organizations that are women in emergency management. One I joined fairly soon, I think, after I became an emergency manager, and one I helped start. And for a couple of reasons. One, for all of the things that we've been talking about being the only woman, which I was when I started. I was another one in a literal room full of only men. And sometimes you need a support system, and the only place to get that was to go outside and join a couple of these organizations that are really focused on promoting and supporting women. And it's interesting because those organizations also have men who are members who are just on board with the whole idea of equality and having a level playing field for everybody. So I've done some of my schoolwork and research has been on gender and women's issues. I've been part of a service club that is all about women's issues. I can't remember a time when they weren't really important to me. So this being my career field now, it just sort of made sense to just take that along with me.
Nicolette, do you want to answer too?
Sure. trying to make sure I don't get fired. So I think I came to the conversation.
Just to say, please say something really bad right now.
So I came to the conversation because one of the things that jumped out at me was this is really kind of my second career. And I tend to hear very well-intentioned people talk about how much they care about diversity and inclusion, and a whole bunch of other stuff that sounds really good, but becomes a major tension when your own comfort and your own privilege starts to be pressed up against. And quite honestly, I've just, over the last 2 years or so, just stopped trying to teach people how to make room for me at the table. I've stopped trying to take the time to figure out how to make it more comfortable for people to be okay with me being in the room, and I'm just in the room. And so part of it for me is I'm willing to have a conversation with other women that I deeply respect, and Mitch and Andrew, because I think there's a really important frame that we're setting here. But honestly, I tend to not have these conversations because oftentimes they're meaningless, because they are the feel-good, shallow conversations about how do we feel more comfortable about keeping everything the same, but saying we want to be different. And so I don't really do that anymore.
Yeah, so I will add to that I have started to be a little bit more vocal about women in emergency management as I started teaching. While I was in graduate school, there were relatively few women that were my students and taking classes, and I want to kind of be vocal for them. I didn't really have anybody for many years that somebody who looked like me that was doing the type of work that I wanted to be doing in emergency management. And one of the reasons why I am so present online and putting myself out there is that so girls and younger women can have somebody who maybe looks like them, who is doing work that they may be interested in doing, and just giving kind of a public face to being a woman in emergency management.
I'm going to follow up on that.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Because you said something that made me remember when I was getting my graduate degree, my primary professor who became my mentor was a woman. And so I didn't really realize that emergency management as a profession was so male dominated, because my experience in school was a very even split. Actually, I would say there were probably more women. As a matter of fact, I know there were more women who graduated with me than men. But then I got to the real world and discovered, oh, it's not always that way. But that mentorship is critical, I think, for women who are forging ahead in this field.
Yeah, similar experience. By the time I got to grad school, my advisor was a woman, and she was that role model for me that I could follow. Like, I finally had that person. But yeah, it took several years to get to that place.
I just find that, like, I'm sitting here like in awe because I have never had a mentor in my field that looks like me. Full stop.
Ditto.
And right. So
Ditto.
It's, for me, that's incredible that there was someone that you could look at. And I do believe representation matters. I've just never had it. And so I think it's incredible that you had that. I want to know what that's like, to be honest, because for me, it's always been this experience of how do you pull the good things you see from a bunch of different mentors, or translate what you see from a mentor who does look like you from a different field, or some trailblazer you've heard about or read about in a book that you went to dig up and learn about, into your own field. But I've never had a mentor in my field that looks like me.
Nicolette, you bring up something really important. I found a woman who looks like me, who actually heads a consulting agency. And I remember being the, the bold Indian woman I am and emergency manager. I found her at one of these IAM conferences, and I went to her and I said, there aren't many women in emergency management who look like me.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to be your mentee. Would you mentor me? And she just shook me off. And I remember thinking, that's just really disappointing. But that didn't stop me from seeking mentors in other people.
Right, right. So I think that's really a really interesting part of this is it's one thing to fight about the experience of being women in emergency management. It's another thing to not glorify being the only one in the room.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of tension in how do we, especially for some of the older, frankly, especially for me, like when I see some of the older women of color that I look at and say, hey, you did it in finance. Can you teach me how to do it here? They're used to being celebrated as the only one, right? And they don't really want to make space for other people because it takes away from their shine, or they think it does. So, I think the example you're giving is a testament to that.
I think it could be all of the above. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that no matter how angry we may get or disappointed, that anger shouldn't be the way we respond, because, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to just say what I need to say on this, because I really like the way you phrase it. I'm not really here to make everyone feel comfortable about my color or about my place, because I don't need anyone to give me a place, because I make my own place in the world. But a lot of folks have worked really hard to get where they are, and sometimes they're afraid if they let up for an instant that they lose whatever they may have. And I have learned now that that's okay, that that's how they may feel. I might have to find somebody else who is willing to be generous with his or her time, but I need to keep looking, because that's not he or she is not the right person for me. But whatever it is, the struggle is there for so many. And I think the fact that we are all having this conversation, and do you remember in our comments before our prep conversations, I said to you all, I cannot talk about gender if I can't talk about color. Because for you, and I keep going back, but I can't walk into a room as just a woman in emergency management. Exactly. I think we carry everything that we are when we walk in. Our hair color, our eye color, our weight, our the positions we held or we didn't hold, or the people who liked us or didn't like us, or frankly the color boots we wear sometimes are held against us, right? All that garbage that we have to deal with. Well, it is the truth. But I recognize it every day that I go in. I don't know what I'm going to deal with, but I know who I am, and I know what I have to deal with. And I try to do it with kindness, and I try to do it with understanding, because the person across from me may not be as far along in his or her development or journey in their place in life.
You said something, Susuma, and I may actually have paper, and I wrote it down so that I wouldn't forget. I refrained from butting in like I usually do. But you said that sometimes you said something about the fear of keeping up, or the fear of being replaced might keep someone from being helpful. I'm paraphrasing horribly, but you know what you said. And that just made me think, I have that fear. I have this fear that if I let go for an instant, I will be run off and pushed to the side like a pile of snow with a snowplow. But part of keeping up is finding people to share information with and learn back from. But I know that that's not everybody, but I think that's probably a fear that a lot of people have. I think particularly women. Women tend to suffer from imposter syndrome way more than men do anyway. And so we have this constant fear of, am I good enough? Can I compete? Do I really belong here? It's just our thing, I guess. But I think it's important that for some people that manifests itself in, no, I'm not going to help you because this is my piece. And that doesn't help anybody really. Sorry, I just had to say that because it triggered your comment triggered that thought. And I'm like, that's a very real thing.
I want to go back because I don't think we actually answered Nicolette's question about what it like having a mentor who looks like you. So first of all, I've never been asked that question and I've never really thought about it. So thank you for asking me that. My initial reaction to that question is that it's great. I think it kind of gives you a sense of, well, if she can do it, I can do it. It's empowering to see that somebody else has blazed that trail for you first, and is there to warn you of the obstacles that are there. And also just a sense of being able to relax about certain things, right? Just not needing to necessarily be worried about what I'm wearing or something if my shirt is low cut or something going into a meeting, like it doesn't matter, right? Like those types of things just all of a sudden aren't a bigger issue. But yeah, I'd be curious to see if Sarah has anything to add.
You know, it's interesting because so I got one of the very early online master's degrees in emergency management, and I had no idea what my professor/mentor looked like. I knew she was a woman because we talked on the phone and her name was a woman and her voice was a woman, but I had no idea what she looked like, and nor did she know what I looked like. This was in sort of the dark ages of the internet, and we didn't have fancy things like online message boards and chat with pictures. So I think that my experience was very different in that because I had no idea what she looked like. Now, as it turned out, she looked very much like me in the end, but I had no way of knowing that initially.
Interesting.
It's interesting because I see online learning sometimes as a little bit of a equalizer in that realm where you're just looking at people. You're not looking, you're I don't want to use judge, but you're evaluating people on their merits and their knowledge rather than on how they look. And I think that is, I think it's a big equalizer that helps this somewhat.
So let's dig into emergency management a little bit more. I want to start talking about our experiences in emergency management and the perspectives that we bring to the field. So anyone can jump in, but what has your experience in emergency management been? And I guess the follow on to that is, how has your perspective been shaped by all of who you are and how you bring that into the field? I see that smile over there.
Y'all think I'm just gonna get a beer?
Should I start?
Yes, go for it.
I'm trying to think here how to organize my words so that it doesn't come out as this rush. But the thing about emergency management is that there are so many different kinds of people in it that you could literally be anything you wanted to be, because we need all kinds of it, right? We need all kinds of people and all kinds of skills. But invariably, I keep running across the same kinds of people. I don't like the way you look because, you're just too big, or you're just too brown, or you're just not white, or it doesn't matter that you have a degree or that you're a veteran or that, you've worked, I don't know how many disasters, or you've been the chair of 2 different VOADs in 2 different states. You're just a woman, and sometimes it's you have a uterus or you have ovaries is what I really hear. And then I want to say, no, I actually returned my uterus. So thank you very much. And I don't even see that as vulgar any longer because I've said that so many times. But the thing is, none of us can do this by ourselves. we really do need each other, because every time we go into a situation, whether we're working in an EOC, whether we're working in the field, and I specialize in helping a local agency or, nonprofit integrate their work into the local disaster operations. And that means I specialize in relationship building. So what does that mean? I get to know people. Why do you think I call myself a connector? Because I look at people and I say, hey, what can you do best? So if that means I see that you're a person of color, I'm going to say, hey, whoa, we might have something in common. But it also means that I'm going to look at the white girl next to me and say, hey, we have something in common because, hey, I think we have ovaries, Or the guy and say, hey, weren't we stationed at Fort Irwin? But you get my point. We can find common ground with everybody. But what I can't stand are the people who don't allow us to find common ground, because all they can see when they see me is the brown girl or the older person, or frankly, I don't know what they see sometimes, because their face is so disgusting and so filled with haze. Sorry. Actually, I'm going to stop apologizing, right?
Yeah,
but you want a truth, right? This is what I see. This is what I share. And I think the people, our listeners, if you will, they want to hear what we're really thinking. They don't want us to sugarcoat it. And you'll note that in spite of my background in military and the fact that I love the F word, I haven't used it. Okay? I think that's the point here, is that we choose to be a certain way or we choose not to be a certain way. But being open to others is certainly a better way to be an emergency manager in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So this makes me think, earlier Sarah said something about, I'm going to misquote you here, but you said something about feeling competition and maybe being concerned about sometimes if you're bringing somebody else in, are they going to take your place? And you said that, and I thought to myself, oh, wow, I don't feel that way usually, because I feel like there's so much space in emergency management, and then Susuma kind of linked this for me, especially because there's this need for all kinds of people. And so I'm kind of want to dig into a little bit more why maybe we feel that competition, or why we have that instinct of, wanting to protect our space, and where we think that comes from.
I know where I think it comes from.
Go for it.
Because for me, it goes way back to when I joined Search and Rescue. I took every training, I got every possible qualification that existed, because I never wanted to be passed over for something because I was a girl. I wanted to be the best qualified, so nobody had any excuse to shut me out. And that probably holds true to this day. I am a hoarder of certificates and certifications and degrees and things. And I suspect it's very much for that reason. I guess I don't so much fear being replaced, because God knows I do not want to do this forever. So someone has to replace me. But I think, for me, it's a competitive, I guess it's competitive, because to be recognized, you had to be the best. And to be the best, you had to do all the things all the time. That's not necessarily healthy, probably not at all healthy. But it very much shaped who I was, and probably still does. And not too long after I started working as a city emergency manager, I was attached to a police department, and we were talking about our EOC, and one of the police commanders, who became a friend, he said, well, I don't even remember how it came up. He said, well, who's in charge of the EOC? And I said, well, I am. And he said, do you think people will actually listen to you? And he didn't mean it unkindly. It just never dawned on him that a girl would be in charge of things. And I'm pretty sure I gave him a look, because he quickly backpedaled. But that was the mindset of, well, of course they're going to listen to. And I said, of course they're going to listen to me. It's my job. It's my EOC. They're going to listen or they're going to leave, which also was very shocking. But that plays right into that. If I'm not at the top of my game, somebody's going to challenge me, and it might be somebody with power and authority, and I got to be up to that challenge.
It's funny that you said that, because two things. One is I deal with that every day. I'm the executive director of an organization. I'm also the president of the organization. I have to defend or remind people of that on a daily basis, so much so that my deputy, who is an exceptional white woman, is often asked to make the final decisions on things while I am sitting in the same room. Like, see, I almost dropped an F-bomb, caught it. Like, how does that happen though, right? So like, how, in what world is it that you have to continue to remind someone that you actually have the authority, which you already have? Like, how does that make sense? And so the story I've been saving, this happened to me last week, and I'm going to try to not use any real identifiers, but I moderated a panel and I was a part of the organizing committee. And as much as we tried, it was really, really hard, exceptional meeting, really hard to get experts in different parts of supply chain that were not white men, specifically middle-aged white men. And so I moderate this panel and I am like all of the diversity in the panel, like all of it, to the point where it was hilarious to look at the headshots, because it was like headshot, 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 speck of brown girl on top. And it was awkward. But I actually had someone that I really respected in the field complain to me about it afterwards and point out that there was no diversity. And they just felt like they had failed everyone in the field because she was looking for younger people in the field to really take over, and she hadn't seen it. But I was there. How did you miss a whole person? Like, how do you not see someone in a space where you are? How do you decide that someone is invisible to you?
Implicit bias.
But that's the world, right? That's a big part of this. I realized, and I said it to someone the other day, like, I don't stay in emergency management because the field is welcoming. I stay in emergency management because I'm dedicated to the patients that we serve. And frankly, the communities that we serve look a lot more like me than the field.
Mm-hmm. All right. Nicolette just had a hold my beer moment. I like that. That was powerful.
Yep. So we actually have a question from the YouTube feed that kind of goes along this, if you don't mind me asking it. It's from Tony Hauser, and she says, question for everyone. Have you ever been accused of being argumentative or bossy or any of the other words that people use to describe assertive women? And she also later added, swearing is totally okay.
Tony would like to encourage the use of F-bombs.
Yeah, except this is getting recorded for posterity.
And I asked my family to watch, so no.
Right, my mama's watching, so.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yes.
So I assume everybody's answer is yes.
A resounding yes.
Do you have a story to share about that?
Can I go first?
Go for it.
Is anybody going to roll their eyes at that one, right? So I spent a number of years as a VOAD chair, VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, for those who don't know, and as a chairperson of a conference committee for our professional association, IAM. And if I were to deliver anything directly, like the men do, I was always, it was bad-spirited, or, we should really be nicer to people. So I had to learn to use positive words, and I had to use, and you see me doing this today. I say things like, I am unable to do that for you, or allow me to offer a different perspective. What I really want to say to you is, what the heck is going through your head? But I cannot say that, because you see me and I think you can see through my little screen here, I am an animated woman. and I cannot be anything but who I am. And I also have a color attached to me, which means there's a bias attached to me. Whether you're aware of it or not is, I don't know. But because of implicit bias, because of your prejudices, your whatever you may come in through the door, there is also an expectation of women to be nicer. We are not allowed to be direct. We are not allowed to say, hey, you need to stay and do your work because that's what you get paid to do. Or, hey, volunteer on the committee, you cannot get credit for volunteering if you actually don't volunteer. Sarah's familiar with how I work with a committee to get work done. Be responsible, be an adult, but always be polite, be kind, but no room for BS here because we're adults.
I got written up on my yearly evaluation once I know, right? So for my use of humor, of all things, we had my boss and I had an exchange we had difference of opinion about that because I use humor as an icebreaker, and I don't use inappropriate humor, but it was ultimately, and that same boss at one point not wrote me up, but put in my annual evaluation that I was aggressive. I just put my evaluations in the shredder because it did not matter what was on them. And that's exactly, I gave them the consideration they were due. But it's a very real thing because I know the other people that were evaluated, and none of them who behave in the same manner that I do were ever written up for those things. I interviewed for a job once, and I had an inside source who knew the deliberations of the interview panel, and a colleague and I, both women, were summarily described by this committee. I was aggressive and she was a wallflower, and they hired a middle-aged white dude, and then it did not go well for them ultimately, we get labels attached to us that have no bearing on our ability to do the job, and you fill in whatever label you want, but they are not the same labels that would be used for men doing the exact same things and the exact same jobs that we do.
Yeah.
So I've almost been fired because I was aggressive, arrogant, and bitchy. I get called bitchy at least once a month, like today. That still happens. And fortunately, I'm actually at a point in my career where I can shrug it off, or I could shred, the evaluation. But when you're not at that point, and you're worrying about how to police yourself and how to monitor, how you interact with people. And just to be clear, some of my worst critics were women. So it wasn't always men. So it has been a journey. What I've realized, especially in the last, 6 months of constantly activating for things, is I can't actually do a good job in the things that I have to do and worry about over policing myself. And so there were a lot of times where I would do I'm so sorry, I wish I could do that, but I'm unable to do it for you. And the really polite, smile while I'm saying no, and all of these other things. And I just realized that I would kill myself trying to do this job and trying to be pleasant and what people wanted me to be.
Yeah, I think this also just brings up an important point about people thinking they can do things to you and give you unsolicited criticism that they're never going to walk up to a man and say, or a white man and say that same thing to. The very first time I went to an emergency management conference, I was probably 22 years old. I was going there to present the very first research I had ever done. I was so excited. I marched in there with my PowerPoint ready to go. I was super nervous. There were other circumstances that were making me especially nervous. One of the researchers that my research was based off of turned out to be sitting in the very front row unexpectedly. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? totally overwhelmed. Again, 22 years old, very little experience public speaking. And the research was super theoretical and kind of complicated. And so I gave my presentation, and like, sure, not the best presentation. I've given many better ones since, but it was fine. Like, it was fine. And I gave the presentation, and I like go back to the back of the room. And the very first person that comes up to me is this older white man who walks up to me and says, I just want to tell you that you need to get a speaking coach, because if you think that you can give a presentation sounding like you just sounded, you're never going to get anywhere in this field. And I just like, the audacity to say that, and the audacity to like I still almost can't believe that happened, right? But even, right, and so it's not even necessarily always about being bossy or being arrogant or calling people out for being aggressive, right? It's also just this thinking that, you know, men have license to come up to you and sometimes women, and to just come up to you and say whatever they want to say, and to even know how to react in those situations. And again, like you were saying, at that time, I had no idea how to handle that situation. I had no idea how to react to that person. I just like, I don't think I said anything. I just kind of like withered away. Like, it was awful. Now, if somebody said that to me, it would be a very different conversation. But I think it's also something that I spend a lot of time thinking about too, is how age plays into this, and how, you know, the length of time of being in the field plays into knowing how to handle these types of situations.
Yeah, let me ask a question, if I can, as a middle-aged white man. And first of all, I own what you're saying, and I've seen that crap happen, and I've been complicit in it. And it's something like I'm working on trying to change the field. And so that's what I kind of want to focus on, which is, you know, we've heard this discussion a lot, and I think this change is happening a lot all over the place. What do you think is specific to the guys who wear the khakis? You know, are there parts or things in emergency management in particular that feed this differently than other fields? I think that's something people would really appreciate. How do we self-diagnose it in terms of something emergency managers do that maybe is different than other places?
You know, I think one of the biggest things is to listen. When you're being told that you're being a jerk, then stop. And it is shocking to me that when you look someone in the eye and you say, knock it off, and they think you're being funny. I had that happen at the big conference last year with someone who was saying things that were inappropriate. They had a lot of sexual innuendo in them, and they didn't belong there. And I said, knock it off. I said, knock it off 3 different times, and it never got knocked off. And if I tell you something, why do you not listen? And obviously it was not you, but that makes no sense to me. Like, I don't understand that mentality where I tell you you're being inappropriate and you think that that's a joke. It's not a joke. If it's gotten to the point where I've said something, if we've gone well past joke stage and we're at like fisticuff stage practically, because I have zero tolerance for that. And yet here was this guy like, ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. And I lost a lot of respect for that person in that moment. And I think he's probably completely oblivious still. And there's the awkward silence.
It's interesting because I've been noticing like how polite we all are, right? So
because we're live. I know this can't be edited live.
Yeah, there's that.
We wouldn't edit it anyway, you know, so it really doesn't matter.
Probably because we don't know how.
Yeah.
It also is because we hold different positions and we recognize that we're responsible for the people we may represent, and we cannot just say what comes to mind. But regardless of whether the men are in emergency management or where they wear khakis, however we want to say them, cargo pants, right? The field is bigger than just those pieces.
Yeah.
It's literally the gender. There's this divide of, if you think that the other gender, whichever gender you are, because it's not always the man or the male gender not listening to the female gender. It's sometimes the reverse. Whatever gender you are, if you are told to stop whatever the defensive behavior is, if you are dismissing the other, there's something else happening. It's this idea that you think that you are more important than the person at the other end. And I think that's a larger issue.
Mhm.
And that's not something that we can necessarily fix with our conversation alone. It has to be all of our voices, but it also has to be women feeling unafraid to stand up and say, hey, get your hands off of me, or stop saying that to me. And if they're in a certain position where they might lose their job because the person saying that is the one who writes the evaluation, or whatever, insert whatever compromising situation you want into that, then they may not feel so inclined.
Mhm.
So I know this is about emergency management, but I want to say that the people who listen to this podcast are not just emergency managers in that they are in the affiliated fields and they hold different roles in this larger field. And it's not just about the cargo pants or just those tropes. It's a much larger issue for us.
Mhm.
But I think there's the inappropriate behavior that happens because people don't respect other people's humanity. And then there is the cultural issue of how do you deal with your own biases in how you come to your job and how you do your job. And so for me, I do logistics, right? So a big part of what we do is healthcare logistics. Assuming that I actually need someone else's help in figuring out logistics is probably not going to be helpful in how we work together or do our job. That is something that men do a lot. So in terms of kind of the, going back to the question of like, what do you do? Thinking about the culture and the overall environment and whether or not it's conducive to really being inclusive. Right. I still have to, and I'm not kidding when I say this, I still have to crash planning meetings that are happening over bourbon. I drink bourbon. I love bourbon. Always invite me when you're having bourbon. Why do I have to crash the party? And why is that how business is being handled? And that's okay, right? Because it's the part of the culture that perpetuates the idea of a boys' club. So when we're in the formal setting, you can be polite and you can, be genteel in all of your sensibilities, but then you're still perpetuating a culture that feeds into your own comfort, frankly. And it just does me a disservice because now you've created a different room that I have to fight my way into.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to emphasize is that it's not only about barriers of entry into the profession of emergency management or like whatever area of emergency management you're working in. It very much is about the day-to-day of being in that position and not only accomplishing what you're supposed to be doing in that position and being able to do your job and do it well, but also being able to navigate this entire system that's working against you when you're trying to be promoted or try to get a raise, right? And to move into positions of greater authority. That is just as, there are just as many issues there, just as many barriers.
So, it's interesting that you're saying what you're saying, because I got so fed up with all of that I said, you know what, I'm tired of all of these guys just overlooking what I had to say when in many cases I was more qualified than they were. I had more credentials. So I said, listen, you guys may ignore Susama, but you sure as hell are not going to ignore Dr. Seeley. So that's why I'm doing my doctorate. So when I go back to these schmucks who, when they try to call me Susama, I'm going to say, no, sweetheart. The name is Dr. Seeley. And I'm going to take great pleasure in doing that. Because, and I want you to know, I tell the women of, especially the young women of color who I encounter, I tell them, this is why I'm doing my doctorate. Because I'm in my 40s. And I'm not white. And by the way, not that white women have an easy ride either, women in general. But in this field, we don't get an easy ride. So this is why I'm doing it. So one, you're not alone. Two, you do have to fight your way into every room. Sometimes you have to create the room, separate room for us, right? But this is why I'm doing it, so that the folks who are coming behind me, they know they have people who will help them, because people have helped us.
It's funny that you say that, because I know how many people it pains to have to call me doctor. And so,
amen, sister. Amen.
But it's true. It's like there are a ton of people who will work with you because they have to, and then because you have the credential, they're like, damn it, I have to respect you and I have to call you that. And it drives them insane. It's a delicious level of shock. It's so incredibly enjoyable to watch the pain on their faces. But there are a lot of times where that is the only reason. I mean, I've been kicked out of chairs that had my name on it because they were like, oh, no, that's reserved for Dr. Lewis Saint. Like that's a seat for that person. Like, actually,
do I need to get my ID out?
Right. Right. But just get ready. It'll be interesting. And I'm sure Samantha has similar experiences as well.
There is a reason that my Twitter name is Dr. Samantha Montano. It just straight to the point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk about quickly is a few of us have mentioned at different points about creating space for ourselves and creating room at tables for ourselves. I was thinking it might be useful to other women who are listening to hear maybe some of your like top strategy for how to do that, to create space for yourself, but also to create space for other women.
So I think my answer now is very different than it would have been 10 or 15 years ago. Now I just charge in and I just do the things, and because it's far less important to me. Mm-hmm. But one of the things when I first started as a brand new emergency manager, I was the only girl in the region. I was 20 years younger than anyone else at the table. And literally it was a table. It was an oval shaped table that represented multiple agencies. I was the only woman. I was far, far junior. But one of those people at that table became my mentor, whether he knew it or not, because he was kind and he did not care about any of those other things. He looked at me as a professional, and I went, oh, well, there's my ally in that. And I think that finding an ally is really critical. And I didn't probably fully recognize it until sometime later. And he's since retired, and he knows he held that role because I've told him and I've thanked him for that. And his response was, well, it didn't matter that you were a girl or that you were young. You got the job, and that was your job, and you were at the table with the rest of us. So I treated you like I treated everybody else. And he set the example for everyone else around that table, though. And I was the first then of many. By the time the table quit meeting, the round table, there were probably half a dozen of us. But then I became sort of the ally to new people coming in. And for a while, it was all women. And I think that is important, to find an ally somewhere. And I hesitate to call mentor because it sounds very formal, and people are like, no, I don't have time to be a mentor. Well, can you just be nice? That's really all it takes most of the time. And I think that's the key, is finding those people who support you and can help you either tune out or navigate around the rest.
It's interesting. Sarah and I have some parallels in our journeys. So I'm very much a believer in, you have to be ready for opportunities and you have to speak up. One prime example is for IAM, they needed a vice chair for their conference committee. Now it feels like it was 100 years ago, but it was only 5 or 6, but it feels like it was so long ago. And I remember going up to the person who was going to be chair, and I said, listen, with me, you get a veteran, a female, you get an emergency manager who's doing faith-based, and I don't know what else I said, but with me, you get diversity. you don't have anybody else on your entire committee who can fill diversity like I can. And right now, IAM has no diversity. I mean, I just laid it all out. And, this committee had no diversity. And I was basically sharing what I brought to the table, but I was being very vocal about it. I wasn't being a jerk. I was just saying, look, this is what I bring. And if you bring me on and teach me the trade, read that as work like a dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And learn your craft and work like a dog and learn your craft, then you get to move forward. And I did. And then the next year I became chair. I spent 4 years, 5 years, I don't even remember now because, it was a long time. But while I was there, I had to fight to make space for people who looked like me, because guess what? There aren't people who look like me. And bringing diversity in is so difficult because all the researchers are old white men. And as much as we love all the old white men, they're old white men. And I think if we saw them today, and I think we're Facebook friends with them, they're all old white men, and they will tell you that we're all old white men, okay? There are some women in there, and some of those women recognized, hey, look at her. She's a woman in emergency management who needs support. And then a couple of those women stepped up behind me. And, when I was getting ready to do, when I decided I wanted to do my doctorate, one of them said, hey, this is the program to do. And then she just kind of, I'm just shout her out. Dr. Brenda Phillips, I love you.
Oh, she was one of my professors too.
See, but she always looked after me in the sense that if I had questions or I needed something, here she is. She did that. But what's interesting is that when I was on those committees, there was an older white gentleman who served as my mentor. And he passed away about 1.5 years ago, Bob Bowman. And I want to tell you, I feel his loss every day. I have that textbook here too. I have several of her textbooks. My God, right? But I lost Bob 1.5 years ago, and I didn't just lose him. Our field lost him because he was a gentleman, and he was kind, and he didn't care what you were. Because like Sarah said, if you did the job, he treated you with respect. And he did something else that we don't have, and that's he had your back. And then he had calls with you afterwards and said, hey, look, here's the backstory. Here's the other stuff that nobody will tell you because they're not going to take the time. So for all of you listening, not only do you need somebody who can be a mentor to you, but you need somebody who can help you be strategic. All right? So you need strategy and you need strategic placement in all of this.
So guys, before we begin to wrap up, we've talked a lot and there's definitely more that we can do, but I want to get your perspectives on how you think about gender on a day-to-day basis. Do you think about working with women or women of color differently than you approach working with men or white men? Do you think about any of this at all on a day-to-day basis?
All right, I'm up.
Go ahead, take this one, Mitch.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. I guess I'll say coming into this, we were worried, right? I mean, I don't know what, I mean, you guys are all people I respect, that I follow, that I value the work of. But I think that my experience is that, middle-aged white men, whether you wear the khakis or are part of this broader enterprise, do have implicit bias kind of baked in, right? You really do. And you have to sort of start with acknowledging that, and you kind of have to start working through it. And for me, I work in public health, and my experience has been actually that there is more of a woman-based leadership structure in public health than in other like law enforcement or things. And that's been actually very helpful to me as a man to sort of, because most of my mentors have been women coming up in emergency management, which I think has led me to question and sort of try and build conscious frameworks for all this stuff. But you know, I would absolutely be lying if I said that it was perfect, especially right now, right? We're in a charged atmosphere, and I think we need to figure out how to engage that in collaborative ways and grow, you know, treat each other as humans and with care, and also to grow the field so that we help citizens better at the end of this. So I guess just to answer, we'll see, now I'm mansplaining to Andrew. So Andrew,
you can mansplain.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You know, as a guy in this industry, there's only so much I'll ever understand about this subject because I don't have to go through it like you do. And I don't face the challenges that you do. But, you know, I will say as a father of two girls, it is something I think about a lot. And, you know, I had the benefit of being hired my first job out of emergency management by a wonderful woman who's an emergency manager who had an amazing career. First few bosses were women. And so it has been something I've thought about a lot, especially walking into meetings on a regular basis and seeing, you know, maybe one or two or no women in there, and just wondering, you know, what is that? How does that affect, you know, the one woman who is here? You know, how does that affect her career? How does that affect her interactions with the group? And, you know, so yeah, it is something that certainly I think about, and worked in public health, which I did have, you know, probably more women in the industry, but, you know, within emergency management and even the transportation sector now, it's hugely male dominated. And so,
dude, you just Matt Damon.
I just met
Matt Damon, because you said as a father of daughters, right?
Is that what he said?
No, I'm just saying. That's the thing.
Compared to Matt Damon a lot.
No, I don't want to be Ben Affleck in that scenario. I have a red dragon tattoo. Do you want me to show it to you? But
we digress.
Yeah, sorry, we did that. Nicolette, you were saying.
So I just want to, can I just add one quick thing? We didn't even get to this topic, and it's super important. So I just want to throw it in there real quick. Is that, so you're talking about how you go into a room and you see how there's only one woman in there and how like she's handling that situation. It's not only that, it's the fact that we're all talking about how there are rooms with majority men, only men in them, and the repercussions that is having for how we do emergency management. This is like leads into a whole nother conversation for another day, but how is this lack of representation throughout emergency management and the other professions that are involved in emergency management, how is that affecting our ability to do emergency management, and what are the implications for people who are going through, or for women who are going through disasters and through recovery? I know we need to wrap up. Any last?
No, but the thing I want to note on that, and it just to jump off what Dr. Montano said, is that, you know, what that speaks to is a weakness in the field, because what that means is those dudes that are there weren't hired based on objective criteria. And what that means is there's not an underlying underpinning of what the job is that we need to do, right? And so it really becomes this kind of systemic bias issue. As soon as that room exists, the field has a problem, which means that the people who are survivors of a disaster have a problem, because there aren't people at the center of it that have objective criteria about how to do their job.
I would go a step further to say that there may be people who don't get to be survivors of disasters because of how we go about doing our jobs.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's heavy.
All right. Well, on that note.
It's powerful.
Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight. And it's, you know, you're putting yourself out there. It's you know, you're being vulnerable, but I really appreciate it.
You're taking us to school, which we appreciate.
It's a conversation that needs to happen every day, and it needs to happen more. And we'd love to, there's a lot we didn't get to tonight. And so we'd love to have you all back on at another time and talk more about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe we make our own podcast, The Divas.
There you go.
That's what I suggested on Twitter. That's how I ended up here.
You should. That is a great idea.
Management podcast. I don't have time to do it. If somebody else listening or one of y'all want to do it, do it. There's so much to talk about. There are so many people who would support you and listen and be guests. Somebody should do it. Make it happen.
I
Absolutely.
agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, and if you need any help, we're happy to be the allies in that situation.
Well,
Well, thanks everybody very much, and we'll be talking.
All right.
thank you.
All right.
I'm gonna
Thank you.
okay.
Good
I'm gonna cut the recording then,
Fine.
but I'm gonna just leave it broadcasting because now this is behind the scenes again.
Okay, so now we're not recording the podcast,
But we are still airing
streaming.
live.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much difference that makes, but
That can't possibly get us into trouble, can it?
no, that's fine, especially
So we
since
can say the
YouTube
F word
archives
now?
all of these. For 100 years.
Oh man, great
And I
job,
love
everyone.
Tony's comment about the improvement plan for white men in emergency
Yes.
management.
We
Great.
send that to IAM.
I will co-author that.
Corrective action 1.1. Don't be a
Yeah.
douchebag.
Yes.
Corrective action
Yes.
1.2.
In
remove
the words of
anything-
Don't
it
think with your
Knock it the
dangly
fuck off.
bits.
In the words of Will Wheaton, don't be a dick.
That's right.
Words
No,
to
this
live
is
by.
actually going in the podcast. I'm sorry, I lied. We really need that part.
7-second
I
delay.
know you can edit that out.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, how do y'all feel?
Yeah.
Good.
Good. I think we could do a whole set on,
Yeah.
well, there's so many things. Like we didn't touch on the intersectionality of LGBTQ issues. And that occurred to me as we're wrapping. I'm like, how did we miss that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a whole list. I had a whole page of stuff. Some of Elaine Anderson's research.
Oh yeah.
My hero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I had Elaine come in and do a whole spotlight for us at the conference,
Hmm.
and I learned some important lessons from her. So there's a whole section we missed.
I have every book she's ever written, and they're all autographed.
Yeah, hell yeah, that's what we should do, right? That's the game we should be playing.
Maybe we should actually think about pushing this for one of the next conferences as like a track. Because there is
Yeah.
so much to digest. We could
Yeah.
do, I'm looking at that face over there. What's happening? So someone's like,
It's because they did speaker selection last week. It's already done. The
still
program is put
perfect.
They're
together.
still in vision.
TikTok thing.
Oh, that's right. One of you guys could do the submit for the Envision talks. That's right.
Is
Yeah.
this for the IAEM conference?
Uh-huh. I will coach you if you like. But I would keep my name out of it right now. Sort of.
That sounds like there's a story there.
We
We are
get on
still
the
live.
Yeah, that's
By the
right.
way.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love the question about being aggressive because I
love it.
do
And I
it every day.
Angry brown woman, angry black woman, angry woman.
angry woman.
I mean, I go through. So the other thing about this is like I change my hair every 5 minutes, right? And so now my hair is an act of aggression.
Oh,
So
Of course.
it's not even,
Of course.
it's not even just my face, just my skin. It's also like, how dare you have braids? Oh my God. Your hair is curly today and it's not straight. And it's like, I don't, there's no winning, right?
yeah,
Well, how much
you
of
can't
it?
win.
You know what we also need to bring up, Nicolette, is colonialization. Because that,
Yes.
for you and I, that's a big deal. Because a lot of the way that I react is because of how I'm so well colonialized.
Yes.
The hair
Yes.
thing, though? So, you know how I noted that I started this a long time ago in Search and Rescue? I ended up with basically a crew cut because I was tired of dealing with my hair. I like cut it all off.
Right.
There was none. And it was very much a trying to fit in thing.
Or
I
was it
never
about
thought
your
about that.
helmet?
Huh?
Was it about your helmet? Because I chopped my hair off to fit better under the Kevlar.
Well, I didn't have to wear Kevlar. I was 14, for Christ's sake.
Oh, okay.
And not in today's modern school system. Yeah, sorry.
No, I get it. I get it all the time. It's too curly.
Mhm.
And then, or what'll happen is the like 5 times I have it straight, I get a lot of compliments like, that looks so good. You should do that more often.
Because you look like
so
a white girl.
happy."
Oh God.
It's because you look like a
happy
white
with
girl.
my hair straight.
You know what? One of the most insulting things I've ever said. You said that, and it popped in my head. I went somewhere, and I can't remember where. And this little old lady looked at me, and she said, "Look how nice you look when you wear makeup." And I was so, I still remember it because it was so just horrid. Like, really? That's the only thing you notice about me?
Yep. Sarah, as hard as that is, when we go into work, when we're not wearing makeup or we're not doing our hair, we don't get work. We don't get compliments. There's so many things we don't get because we don't follow so many of those requirements to fit in. Yep. So hence all the beard jokes and although I did actually put on mascara for you guys. I'll be honest about that. You know, I did have that, but it's the truth. If you're not wearing makeup and you don't look done up, then in the corporate world, you are not appropriately attired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just funny because I remember, so the never-ending hurricane season, right? So we're rolling from Harvey into Irma, and then, you know, just the shitstorm that continued. And once we were in the middle of Maria, I remember I got into work and someone was like, well, obviously you're not that tired because you have on makeup. And I'm like, but why is that something you feel you should say to me?
Yeah. Exactly. Like, exactly. I think we could write a book. Yeah. Yeah.
That sucks. I don't know what to say other than this.
People say.
Like on top of everything else, on top of the stress of a disaster, then you have to worry about that. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, and for me, that was, you know, actually the conversation about representation. The first place that I went was to Maria because I'm Caribbean, right? And so I'm activated for Harvey, watching Irma because I've got family straight throughout the Caribbean. And so this is personal and professional. And I'm literally watching it going, okay, my sister just left St. Kitts 2 weeks ago. So it's where she lives. And I'm just like, we go to, you know, and we're dealing with USVI and there's culture there, right? So there's culture. We're not just talking about us, you know, assuming this is American culture. There are some ways that Puerto Rico and the USVI work that are different than the rest of America, and it should be. And people didn't know what to do with that. And so I'm fighting through. I have Puerto Ricans in my EOC that are trying to explain to some of our partners like how all this stuff works. But you're here talking about my makeup. So like all of these things are coming and I'm like, we're doing this thing. We're trying to figure out how to connect civil society into emergency management because there was a whole civil society effort going on. And we're trying to explain to people how the culture works and all of that. But yet and still the first conversation you have with me when you walk into our EOC is about the color of my lipstick. What are we doing right now?
And by the way, I'm a PhD.
But I was at Harvey.
The best part was every day while we were activated for all like 80 plus days, someone randomly would walk in and be like, who's in charge? And everyone in the EOC would be like pointing over to me. And they're like, no, I'm looking for who's running this thing.
Oh, Jesus.
Isn't that what in charge means?
Those are the same thing.
When we went to Harvey, the Reader's Digest condensed version, we were going to have a very short night. In other words, very little sleep because we had something we had to get done by morning. And there was me and another woman who were the oldest women on the team. She was the team leader. She was the boss of all the things. And we're working on this thing. And a younger man comes up and tells us it's time to go to bed. And we both just looked at him. He's like, well, you're going to go to bed, right? We both said, no, there's stuff that has to be done. And he lectured us about how we needed to get more sleep and it wasn't healthy and how could we possibly function. And we just literally ignored him because we had things to do. The next day at some point he came up and he said, wow, I'm really impressed. I really didn't think that you could do it with no sleep. It was the weirdest exchange. And you're just like, what compelled you to even be comfortable saying that to the two people who combined experience is more than you have years on this earth? And why would you say that? Why would you say that to us and expect anything other than to be dismissed? He did essentially apologize, though, because he made assumptions and he was wrong.
So we just got a question on YouTube. Is anybody here a mom? Melanie noted that she's found that she's been treated much differently since she's become a mom, including weaker shifts and things like that.
Interesting. I can tell you I interviewed for a job that I got a long time ago, and the final interview, which was a chief's interview, the chief asked me if I was planning on having children because it had been a problem with other employees.
So he broke the law.
Oh, God, yes. But I never recorded it because what am I going to do? His word against my word. I got the job. But to this day, I remember it.
You know, you guys are all talking about the deployments, but I started classes last September. So as all the hurricanes were rolling in and I was watching everything on TV, I had started classes. So I was officially done with deployments. And all I could do was sit at home and cry and pray and, watch on Facebook with what everybody was doing. And so since I don't deploy anymore, and when I'm done with school, I'm going to go work at a federal agency and then retire at 65 with my second pension. I say that every chance I get because, I'm an asshole. But I'm not experiencing the same kinds of discrimination that I used to get in the field. I'm getting this. I'm not sure if it's because I'm brown or if it's because I'm an older woman or because I'm a practitioner, but I have been put in my place by the women at school. Some of them are the instructors or in my program or in other programs or one in our office. Some of them are younger than me. Some of them are older than me. And I just thought it was the most interesting thing. So I wasn't sure. Are you hating on me because I'm a woman? Because, you're a woman too. Are you hating on me because I'm a woman of color? That's possible, right? But there are other women no, actually, there aren't that many other women of color. I forgot about that. But what I realized eventually is that none of them are practitioners. And then when I started having a conversation, they have something, whether they realize it or not, they've just got something about practitioners that they're not their best friends. I'll say it that. Obviously, you guys know where I go to school, so
yeah.
But I think this is a common theme in the place where research halls, research versus practice. So if you're a practitioner and you throw in gender and you throw in all these other issues, so now here I am. I have women putting me in my place, reminding me, and then I look at them and go, sweetheart, we're the same age. We're not going to play these games. Okay? I've been around the block. I have lived more life. I bet I have underwear older than you. That's what I look at some of them and I think, I definitely have underwear older than you. I've been around. And then I look at that, or the professors who have put me in my place, and I go, you do realize, in my head, all inner dialogue here, or monologue technically, you do realize that I'm going to be Dr. Seeley in a few years, and people will find out how horribly you've treated me because word will get out at how you treated me during my first few weeks. And that's all I could do. I couldn't say anything back to them. I couldn't use the F word however many times I wanted to. And I kept thinking about that. So my diary entries, my journal entries were about plotting revenge with my doctorate and saying, so this is how I'm going to get back. I'm going to tell people how unkind you were. And obviously I will do it in a very loving way. But
we're not. Whatever.
Doctorates really are the best revenge, I think.
But I mean, I can't believe that crap.
So yeah. I love y'all. I love this.
I know we gotta stop.
I gotta close it down a second just to mix the showdown before it's become 1 or 2 in the morning.
Okay.
I'm glad your cat joined us though.
That's awesome.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
I was trying so hard to keep him off the screen during the podcast.
Yeah, let him in. That's good TV.
Oh my god.
That's
Mine
how we get our
started
views. with
howling
sheep
in the other
afterwards.
room, and I thought, here we go.
Yeah.
But nope, he took his howls elsewhere.
At one point, you saw me pushing down. That was me pushing him out the screen.
Okay, I need dinner. I need food.
Do we need to do anything else, guys?
I don't think so.
No,
Okay.
did you sign your permission slips or your
Yeah,
your DUAs or
Non-disclosure
NDAs? Yeah,
agreements or
I think
whatever.
we're fine.
Oh, non-disclosure when we've just live broadcast all of this. We gotta not.
You're right. It
Right.
seems like a little late for that at this point.
And that was the
Okay.
perfect shot of your cat, Susan. Well, when it switched to you, he's like looking right at me.
Did it really?
I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, he's my buddy.
He's not gonna. He's done with us now.
Mm.
He's like, pet me, feed me.
Thanks, you guys. That was
All right.
awesome. I hope.
Thanks
you
for
enjoyed
having
it tonight.
us.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Fun.
Bye.
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 Bye.